Well, hi, everyone. If you're out there, please say hi to me in either the YouTube or Facebook comments so I know that you're there. It's great to see everybody tonight. Just going to wait a few minutes for people to join us, as I always do. I hope everyone is well tonight, having a good night. I know it's supposed to be spring, but where I am, it is still freezing cold winter. I hope maybe it's a little nicer where you are. So we have a few more people joining us, so I'll just hang on here and wait. And it looks like my stream is frozen over there. I hope it's not. Let me just reload this over here. Huh, there we go. Now it looks like it's moving again. Kind of worried me because I've been having a few little internet problems here. Let me head back over to my chat. I know someone said hello, but when I reloaded, I lost your chat. I lost your message, so please send it again. I'm sorry about that. Oh, great. Mr. White is here. Mr. Jeffrey in Niagara, nice to see you. I hope no one, oh, Miss Silver. Thank you for looking forward to the lecture tonight. We're going to have a really good time talking about Mr. James Remington and Mr. John Holt, the printers in New York City, or the major printers, at least, going into the Revolutionary War. And I hope you don't mind that I'm joining you with a dressing gown tonight. This would be a sort of dressing gown a lady might wear at home with the chemise underneath. This is the gown that goes underneath the stays, and the dressing gown, goes over all of that. And it's just a comfortable kind of free form thing. It's almost shaped like a kimono, actually. It's just straight on the bottom with some squared off sleeves and gussets. And it's just a dressing gown that you would wear around the house because you wouldn't want to wear your nice clothes, your nice dresses or gowns or, petticoats around the house. So you would take all of that out when you're at home and just wear a dressing gown. So this is a little less formal and, a typical dressing gown. Um, it's delicious foods from Rhode Island. Hello to you too. It's nice to see you too tonight. So just a little bit of a more informal evening at home. Ms. Turley from Southern Indiana, excellent, excellent. Because the ladies didn't sit around at home and all of those confining clothes, right? Because they're a little bit hard to move around, and it can be once you get one of those gowns on, it can be, or jackets, it can be impossible to raise your arms any higher than this. So you really don't have a lot of mobility in those clothes or comfort. So you would take them off when you're at home, be in your upstairs parlor like I am, and just be comfortable. And this is how your family members might see you. Mr. Davis, hello, Mr. Davis. It's nice to see you too. So a little bit of comfort. The gentlemen too might take off, their outer clothes and wear their underclothes, or called their small clothes, and with a similar type of dressing gown or a banyan made of linen or wool, or maybe, if they're very wealthy gentlemen, maybe silk or satin or fabric like that. This is just cotton. It's just a plain, cotton bedgown or dressing gown that a lady might have. So very comfortable. Some of these can be very elaborate as well. That gives rise to the idea, that when um, the crown or the soldiers, this is before there's a police force, wanted to search someone's home and they knocked, they had to wait. They couldn't barge into the house because a lady might only be wearing this, or a lady might just be in her stays. Not even this. I mean, you're in your house, you might just be wearing your chemise and your stays. So they had to provide enough time for a lady in the house to put on proper clothes to be seen publicly to answer the door. So no knock warrants like we have in the 21st century. Who else is here? Ms. Mackey from Brooklyn. Hi, Liz. And Sparrowhawk 76. Always phenomenal to have you here with us from Long Island. So tonight we're going to be talking about the years 1774 through 1775 and the two printers, James Remington and John Holt. And hold on, I just want to rearrange something on my screen here so that I can see you a little bit better without distractions. That's much better. James Remington and John Holt. Now, there were more printers than just these two gentlemen, but in the years 74 and 75. An enormous feud broke out between them with, an end result that really, I don't think anyone ever expected. So let's go back in time and remember that from the Zenger trial of 1735, we have enjoyed a type of freedom of the press in the colony of New York. Remember, John Peter Zenger printed his newspaper, the Weekly Journal. He was arrested for printing articles exposing corruption among the royal governor Cosby and his appointees and friends. He was charged with seditious libel. He went to jail. There was a long trial. And at the end of the trial, the jury rewrote the libel law here in New York. It's called jury nullification. They didn't find him not guilty of libel so much that they said that the libel law, as it was on the books, made no sense because it made something that was true also considered a libel or damaging. And the jury said no. If something was true, it could not be a libel and therefore couldn't be prosecuted because the only way really to expose corruption and criminality was through a truthful press. So the jury, the new law as it came out, said that printers in New York could only be charged with libel if they knowingly and with malice printed a falsehood. So you know what that means, right? That everybody printed whatever they wanted to print and said, I didn't know it wasn't true. I didn't mean to cause harm to anyone. And for decades, the New York press just pretty much printed whatever they wanted to print. And so that developed opposing printers over the years because we all have differences of opinion. And in the 18th century, so in my time, there is no pretense to objectivity in the press. No newspaper claims to be objective. The idea of objectivity just doesn't exist. Every newspaper printer has a point of view and what he supports or doesn't support, and he accepts letters from his friends and colleagues, generally of the same point of view, and prints those letters. Sort of editorials, or he himself might write an editorial. No one expects a newspaper to be objective, so we have many newspapers with different points of view. And so it's important to read all of them, really, to know what's happening in the years leading up to the Revolutionary War, because no one newspaper is telling the full story. And sometimes none of the papers at all are telling the whole true story. So one needs to read many of them, have conversations with your neighbors, and then figure out for yourself what the truth is. I don't think anyone looks to the newspapers for the full truth about events, especially if there are letters printed in the newspapers. So we have Mr. Holt and Mr. Rivington, and these are the mastheads of their newspapers if you have never seen them. Just let me open up this box here. So I'll have this open for us and we can flip through these. Okay, so here is our first set. Move over here. We have on the top, Mr. Rivington's New York Gazetteer, or Weekly Advertiser. And on the bottom, we have John Holt's New York Journal or General Advertiser. And these are the two newspapers that we're going to be discussing tonight and the two gentlemen. Now, both newspapers are around for quite a while before this feud that breaks out in the years 17 and 74 starts. And it starts with John Holt's masthead. In 1774, in support of the people of Boston who are now being punished by military occupation, right? Blockade of their port, loss of their rights and liberties, John Holt places this on his masthead, Unite or Die. You may recall that Unite or Die was originally created by Benjamin Franklin during the French and Indian War or 7 Years' War in order to encourage the colonies to come together and support each other in that war, which didn't happen. So now, prior to the American Revolution, the symbol is back out. It's very popular. And the idea, of course, is that if the colonies unite, they'll be as deadly as a rattlesnake. Now, when you look at this, you might say, but there are not 13 segments on the snake. That's because if you notice up here, the head of the snake is New England. And New England accounts for that whole little bunch that's up there, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine. So they're all included up here. And then you have the rest of the colonies in geographic order, north to south. So if the colonies don't unite, we will be like cut up segments of a snake and we will die. But if we do unite, we'll be as deadly as the northeastern rattlesnake, which the British and everyone feared greatly. So that's the idea of the symbol. So Mr. Holt begins using this symbol on the top of his newspaper instead of the arms of the royal family, which he had before. And when he does this, Mr. Rivington comments that John Holt is now using the symbol of Satan in the Garden of Eden. And Mr. Holt replied to Mr. Rivington, "Why, sir, if that's what you see when you look at this, surely you gaze into a looking glass." And this began the feud between the two gentlemen, which escalated over a 2-year period. So some very good and interesting dialogue between the two men. Now, I should also explain to you that they are across the street from each other. You notice Mr. Rivington on his masthead says, "Printed at his open and uninfluenced press facing Hanover Square." And I will give Mr. Rivington credit because we will see tonight that he did print things from both sides of some arguments. So Mr. Rivington does believe in the free press and an uninfluenced press. And he is just about down the street from my shop, a few doors to my right on Hanover Square. Mr. Holt is across the street on the other side of Hanover Square, and you can see printed by John Holt near the coffee house. And if you know where the Merchant's Coffee House is at Queen and Wall, or to you that would be Pearl and Wall, he's right there on the corner. So just a little bit further off of Hanover Square. So the two men have their print shops pretty much across the street from each other. Everyone knows them. They certainly know each other. Everyone knows each other in New York during this time. My dog Rex says, "Arms, coat of arms, confusing the Second Amendment." Rex, we're not up to the Second Amendment yet. We're only in 1774. Oh, let's back up, slow down a little bit. We're only here. We haven't got there yet. So in 1774, these are our two main printers. And as a result of this little back and forth over the masthead, we get a major feud that erupts between the two gentlemen. And I have a few things here that I printed out to read from their newspapers that I hope will not only inform you, but also amuse you, as the gentlemen of this time who are writing these letters are very eloquent and do have a very good sense of humor and are very good at insulting each other. I also put a note here to tell you that in 1774, just about the time that this is going on here with the masthead, we had a visit in New York from Mr. Paul Revere. Paul Revere came down to New York to try to enlist the support of the New York Sons of Liberty in Boston's cause. He met with everyone at the Queen's Head Tavern, who I think you know as the Francis Tavern in your time. They met at the Queen's Head Tavern, Mr. Sam Francis Place, and the meeting was so huge it overflowed, and they had to meet outside in the marketing area known as the Exchange. Now, there was quite a bit of debate over whether or not New York should support Paul Revere and the Boston Sons. So Captain McDougal encouraged Paul Revere to continue on through his trip to Philadelphia and that he would deliver the support of the New York Sons of Liberty, which he eventually did. So Mr. Revere went on through the other northern colonies to try to get support for the people of Boston who were suffering so terribly. So now by June 15th, the Boston Port Act was enabled. Remember the Boston Port Act? That was the thing that shut Boston's port and allowed no ships to go in or out of the port of Boston, meaning they could send nothing out to sell and they could bring no goods in that they needed either. So this is an attempt to starve and impoverish the people of Boston. So the Boston Port Act is passed also while this is going on. And we get a letter to the printer. A letter to the printer concerning the New York Sons of Liberty. And it says, "To the printer, A very great number of the Friends of American Liberty in this city procured effigies of Thomas Hutchinson, late governor of Massachusetts, Lord North, and Mr. Wedderburn, and exhibited them on a gallows, together with the devil at their right hand, alluding to their diabolical machinations against the rights of this country. On their back were affixed the labels of hypocrite and traitor. So if you don't recall, Thomas Hutchinson was the former governor of Massachusetts before General Thomas Gage was named the military governor. And Mr. North, Lord North, is the Prime Minister of England, and Mr. Wedderburn is a lord in the House of Lords in the Parliament. These effigies were carried through the principal streets of the city and to the coffee house, the Merchant's Coffee House right near here, where they were attended in the evening of that day, it is thought, by the greatest concurrence of spectators ever seen on an occasion here, and destroyed by sulphurous flames, after which the multitude immediately dispersed in the most peaceable, orderly manner. And so, saying that the Sons of Liberty burned the effigies, but all went home in a peaceful and orderly manner. In other words, there was no violence that was incurred that night. Well, the insults just kept going back and forth between Mr. Rivington and Mr. Holt, back and forth in their newspapers, name calling, degrading comments, insults, to such a point that Mr. Rivington actually Mr. Holt requested a formal apology from Mr. Rivington. And you can see Mr. Rivington. So now we're up to August of 1774. And he says, when in times of public difficulty, oh, I'm sorry, this is a different one. I'm not even up to that one. There are even more. So let me back up. So here are some even before he requests this apology. So Mr. Rivington, this is a letter to Mr. Rivington in his newspaper, commenting on Mr. Holt's newspaper. When in times of public difficulty, a printer keeps his press free and open. When his conduct shows that he is unbiased by the narrow views of a party and unawed by the fear of personal resentment, he deserves to be esteemed as one of the most useful and valuable members of the community. In other words, when a printer prints what he knows is right and is not afraid by the mob, he's a great member of the community. But on the contrary, when it is obvious to the meanest capacity that a newspaper is wholly employed in the prosecuting party's designs, tending to inflame the minds of the people against the government, and by means thereof to introduce anarchy and confusion, the printer of such a paper justly renders himself abhorrent to all good men and may well be considered as a pest to society. So this gentleman is saying that John Holt, on the other hand, is allowing his newspaper to be used by this violent faction and is printing all of the things that are inflaming the minds of the people and turning them against the government. He also goes on to say that the writers in Mr. Holt's paper are generally of the lowest class. Oh my, the lowest class. I appeal to every original piece that has been published for some months past. Throughout the whole of them, there appears to be a manifest defect in the circumstances of grammar, propriety, and elegance of style. And for want of variety in the choice and disposition of the words, we find them frequently repeated in a manner exceedingly grating to an English ear, a certain proof that they are not the productions of men of parts and education. Saying that the writing in the paper is so awful, you can tell that it has been done by people of the lower classes who have no education or use of oh my goodness, Mr. Quintus Maximus just came in. There goes my green screen. It seems that Mr. Q is not doing his job of minding the dog. There goes Doggy Q. Excuse him for his barging in on us. In other words, he's saying that the writers in Mr. Holt's paper are denizens of the lower classes who are uneducated and use such terrible grammar and vocabulary that it grates on one's ears. So in response, we get from Mr. Rivington to Mr. Rivington from Mr. Holt this: before I exercise my right of calling upon you for the name of the author whose illiberal invective appeared in your yesterday's paper, I intend to publish some remarks that occurred to me on reading that extraordinary production. as I would be entirely un excuse me, as I would be entirely uninfluenced by any personal considerations in the remarks I intend to publish, the reasons of suspending my inquiry may easily be conceived. Meanwhile, I would just hint to you that I do not think you are publishing such an abusive piece of scurrility against me is justified either by the nature of the printing business or any part of my conduct toward you. On the contrary, I have refused to publish several things merely because they contained reflections upon you, though much less exceptional than those against your humble servant, John Holt. In other words, Mr. Holt is telling Mr. Rivington, I would like the name of the person who wrote that illiberal invective against me. Excuse me. And I would say that such a thing being published is insulting to the printing business. And besides, I have heard much worse about you, but have refrained from printing it in the newspaper, as I know it is, improprietous of me to do so. So we have the two gentlemen going back and forth and back and forth. Well, in the midst of all of this, Lexington and Concord occurred, right? The shot heard round the world. The Revolutionary War began in Massachusetts. And when the war began in April, it was as if the city of New York lost its mind. Oh, we have some more comments here. Stop here. Oh my goodness, the rebel madman from Georgia is joining us. Mr. Gaddy, it is an honor to have you with us here tonight. Let's see. What is this? Oh my God. Oh, I'm a good rebel now. Oh, Richard and Janice in Tennessee. Hello, it's nice to have you as well. Mrs. Emershaw is here, my good friend, Mrs. Emershaw, and my dog, Rex, from Gallatin, Tennessee. Wonderful. We have lots of people from all over here tonight. So when the news of Lexington and Concord arrived in the city of New York in April of 1775, of course, the city lost its mind. What were we to think? The Sons of Liberty immediately went out, confiscated all of the weapons they could from the weapon stores. Remember, at that time, there was no military remaining in the city of New York. That military had all moved to Massachusetts to reinforce General Gage there. General Gage, who I might add, can I add some things about General Gage? We are in my private parlor where no one can hear except us. General Gage, although he was liked in New York, he was very sociable, as was his wife, and he seemed to be reasonably minded about most things and rather neutral in his stance here with the difficulties that were going on. But once he got to Boston and Massachusetts and actually had to make decisions, important decisions on his own, he proved himself to be quite incapable and not up to the job, which was rumored for a long time here in New York, because you see, General Gage was disciplined numerous times during the French and Indian War when he was a commander then for being too cautious and failing to attack when ordered to do so. Was disciplined a number of times for doing that. Surprisingly, the king then made General Gage commander-in-chief of the king's forces in America, based in New York for many years. And when it came time to occupy Massachusetts, he led the occupation Massachusetts. He became the military governor of Massachusetts and now actually had to make decisions concerning the Sons of Liberty there, the unhappiness of the people there, the deployment of the troops. And shall we say that General Gage was not up to the task because, as we know, his failures brought about the shots on Lexington Green on April 19th, 1775. General Gage left a few months later and was replaced with General Sir William Howe. So a little bit of backstory on General Thomas Gage. General Gage had an ongoing feud with another commander, a Viscount, and he were having aristocratic problems between them. Oh, don't you love this? Don't you love the British aristocrats and their aristocratic feuds? As Mr. Q and I have talked about on many occasions, we in the colonies are only a side note to them. Much more important to them are their estates and their parties, their roles in the parliament, if they have them, their rank in society. That's far more important to them than anything going on here. And in the course of war with us, they'll come here to do their duty and fight the war, but they don't care what happens here. They don't care what gets left behind. They only care about going home and resuming their lifestyles at home. So we're just a side note to all of them. We don't really matter to them. They don't really care about us. That was always the thing that puzzled Mr. Q and me about our neighbors who chose to fight on the king's side, loyalists, because they would have to remain after they lost. And of course, Mr. Q and I were sure from the beginning that we would be victorious. Of course, we would be victorious. We're 2 million people here, all of us armed, all of us capable of using those firearms, and none of us willing to give up everything that we worked so hard to build here. So we were sure that we would, in the end, be victorious. But what would happen to our neighbors who stood against us? And what would happen to our neighbors who fought in the colonial regiments commanded by colonial royalists and allied with the native tribes who committed the most heinous, murderous acts on their fellow Americans? What did they think would happen to them at the end of the war? So we sort of thought, Mr. Q and I, that some people maybe didn't thoroughly think through what they were doing, as the Americans who fought for the crown, if they lost, certainly would not be welcome in England at the end of that. There would be no room for them in England, and that's unless they were extraordinarily wealthy. And if they were extraordinarily wealthy, they probably left already and went back to England, as a number of families did. I won't name them. A number of families picked up and left. I won't say the Philippe's family here, but did. And if you were not extremely wealthy, what would happen to you at the end of the war? Would there be retribution against you? So we thought maybe people didn't think that through thoroughly, because the English were all going to go back home and the Hessians were going to go back home, but they would have to stay. So just a little bit of thoughtfulness about, taking sides during the Revolutionary War and what that might mean. So after news arrived at Lexington and Concord, of course, the men broke into all of the storehouses. They confiscated all of the weapons that General Gage had left behind and all of the powder and ammunition, took it to themselves, and some of them began marching around in militaristic fashion throughout the city. The mayor and the governor were forced off of the island eventually and made their home on a ship in the harbor called the Duchess of Gordon, anchored next to an island that we called Benlow's Island, but I think you call that Liberty Island in your time. And so that ship would have been anchored out there for about a year and a half until the British came in and took New York. So the royal governor and the mayor were pushed out of town at that time. So it seemed as if the cities had gone insane. Now, Mr. Rivington and Mr. Holt, of course, were still publishing their newspapers during this time, with people getting angrier and angrier at either side. But in anger at Mr. Rivington, the Sons of Liberty went to New Jersey, another world, went to New Jersey, where they hung an effigy of Mr. Rivington. Hung an effigy of Mr. Rivington, had a celebration, probably drank a little bit too much, but had a very good time of it all. This picture is from Mr. Rivington's newspaper. And may I express to you how difficult and how expensive it would be to put a picture like this in one's newspaper. Recall that a newspaper is printed one page at a time with type that is placed in a box, and anything like this would have to be a custom-made engraving, a block to go in the print box, covered with ink, and then each page. So Mr. Rivington had to commission this engraving in order to put this illustration in his newspaper. We see very few illustrations. Some merchants have have a little illustration at the top of their ad, a little picture that goes along with the sign maybe in front of their shop. But overall, we don't see illustrations in the newspaper. So this was very rare and very surprising for everyone to see. Now, Mr. Remington, when he published this picture, showed all of us, his great eloquence. And let me find here we go. Let me find the article that accompanied this picture. Mr. Remington, for all that would be said about him, was an eloquent writer and an intelligent man, capable man. And this is now April 20th of 1775. So this is right about the time we learn of Lexington and Concord. And he says, last Thursday was hung up by some of the lower class of inhabitants at New Brunswick an effigy representing the person of Mr. Remington, the printer at New York, merely for acting confident with his profession as a free printer. The printer has been informed the number of bacchanalians at Brunswick, flushed with the inebriating draughts, not of the juice of the vine, but of New England rum, have lately sacrificed him to the idol of licentiousness. Lest this piece of heroism should not be sufficiently known, he has thought proper to exhibit a representation of the scene in which he has offered up a victim, that the same of the exploit may spread from pole to pole. From this publication, too, these little shabby, piddling politicians may know how much their vengeance is regarded. But while he consigns these snarling curs, who he is well informed are indeed could be no other than the very dregs of this city, to the same infamy with the pediculous committee at Freehold, he begs leave to address himself to the public. The printer is bold to affirm that his press has been open to publications from all parties, and he defies his enemies to produce an influence to the contrary. He has considered his press in the light of a public office to which every man has a right to have recourse. But the moment he ventured to publish sentiments which were opposed to the dangerous views and designs of certain demagogues, he found himself held up as an enemy to this country, and the most unwearied pains taken to ruin him. And the country wherein he was born, he always heard of the liberty of the press, represented as the great security of freedom. And in that sentiment he has been educated, nor has he reason to think differently now on account of his experience in this country. While his enemies made liberty the prostituted pretense of their illiberal persecution of him, their aim is to establish a most cruel tyranny. And the printer thinks that some very recent transactions will convince the good people of this city of the difference between being governed by a few factious individuals and the good old laws and constitution under which we have so long been a happy people. Mr. Linton says pediculous, lousy, exactly, or lice-infested. So to explain a bit of this to you in more modern language, for those of you not skilled in 18th century language, which I don't expect you to be, not all of us like Mr. White and Mr. Linden and Ms. Emershaw, and a few of us are skilled in this language. Mr. Rebel Madman, of course, also. So he calls them bacchanalians. Bacchanalians are like pagan devil worshippers, naked, drunken bacchanalians. So they're out like these pagan god worshippers of some kind. He says that they're drunk, that they're inebriated, but not on the juice of the vine, not on wine, but cheap New England rum. He refers to them over and over again as the dregs of this city, meaning the lowest lowlifes one can imagine. And he says that since they were so proud to do this, he is equally proud to publish it in his newspaper for all to see, so that their great celebration will not be lost to the people of this land. He then goes on to remind everyone that he has accepted work from people of all different points of view in his newspaper, and that he was raised here with the Zenger trial and the idea of the liberty of the press being the foundation of the liberty and freedom of the people. And that when a faction tries to intimidate the press and keep them from being free, well, it's that faction that is advocating tyranny and not the printer who's doing his best to represent multiple sides of a story. Now, I know there's some of you in New York who will disagree with me that Mr. Rivington was objective or that he wanted to print all sides of the story. But let me remind you about something he printed later this year. Oh, now I should say, before I say that, as a result of the article with this picture in it, the Sons of Liberty paid a visit to Mr. Rivington. Fortunately for him, he was tipped off in advance and he hid in his chimney while they were in his shop. Being frustrated that they couldn't get him out of the chimney, they eventually left. But Mr. Rivington found himself trapped in the chimney for, he said, a number of hours until his neighbors heard him calling for help and came over and assisted him out of the chimney, and he went back to work. Now, as things were developing in 1775, after Lexington and Concord and the war beginning there, a war of broadsides and pamphlets erupted in New York about the meeting of the Continental Congress, right? So now we're having a second Continental Congress, the first Continental Congress having met, and now the war breaking out, and a second Continental Congress being called in Philadelphia. And a gentleman publishes a pamphlet called Free Thoughts on the Proceedings of the Continental Congress at Philadelphia. And this is signed a farmer in Westchester, so A.W. Farmer or a Westchester farmer. And this gentleman talks about the Continental Congress meeting now, after this has begun in Boston, after the occupation of Boston and all that's happened in Boston, is a provocation to England to come after us in New York. That if we were to just sit quietly and let them deal with the problems in Massachusetts, we would be able to maintain our relationship with the crown. As if that relationship by 1775 was such a good one. But anyway, we'll assume that he means that we may have been having problems, but we were still on speaking terms, and that maybe we could have found a redress of our grievances over our differences. But that now that the Continental Congress is meeting and New York is sending delegates, we are now a target of England ourselves, because we are entering into open rebellion and treason against the crown. And so this is written not by a Westchester farmer, but by Bishop Samuel Seabury, the bishop of the Anglican Church in Westchester, or the Church of England, or the official religion of the crown. So Mr. Seabury is not an uneducated farmer at all. He's not a working man at all. When would a farmer have the time to write something like this? A farmer works on his farm from day to night, barely having time to himself. Oh, maybe a gentleman farmer like one of the Mr. Livingstons, who actually doesn't work, but just owns the farmland and leases it to others, and therefore is a gentleman farmer. The writer of this pretends to be a farmer. Well, Mr. Seabury is no farmer. Mr. Seabury is a highly educated man from England and bishop in the Anglican Church. So this is printed. And Mr. Rivington prints the response. And I think in your time, the response is much more well known than the original letter. The response is the farmer refuted, or a view of the colonies, a vindication of the Congress. And I think in your time, you know who wrote this, that this was written by a young man named Alexander Hamilton. And here he is when he's an older gentleman. And this is a refutation of a loyalist, Samuel Seabury, written by a young rebel, Mr. Hamilton, and you'll see on the bottom right here, published by Mr. James Rivington. So maybe there's something to be said for Mr. Rivington's declaration that he is printing all sides, that he is trying to be fair and an uninfluenced printer, that he is trying to give voice to many different points of view in his newspaper. Well, unfortunately, shortly after this, to continue this, I think Mr. Seabury wrote another response, because when Mr. Seabury found out that the person refuting him was what I think he referred to as a brat from King's College. Mr. Hamilton was just a young student at King's College at the time, and Mr. Seabury thought he was just a, obnoxious brat refuting him. He wrote a second one, and Mr. Hamilton wrote one in return. Mr. Holt then went on to publish Mr. Hamilton's 17 series installment, The Monitor, shortly after this began publishing The Monitor. So you see, Mr. Holt and Mr. Rivington both publishing rebel work. Although I don't have any recollection that Mr. Holt published any loyalist work as Mr. Rivington did. So that's a little bit interesting, isn't it? Well, shortly after all of this, Sons of Liberty became enraged at Mr. Rivington again. And shockingly, shocking to all of us, this happened just a few doors away from me. They burst into his shop, Mr. Isaac Sears, and some Sons of Liberty from Connecticut, as if our own aren't bad enough. We need to import them from another colony. Sons of Liberty from Connecticut, they destroyed Mr. Rivington's printing press and carted off the pieces to Connecticut, where it is rumored that it is in use in Connecticut for a small printer there. Mr. Rivington had the finest typesets of anyone in the city. He used beautiful typesets. He used very good paper that he printed on, and his newspaper really was one of the finest publications in the city. And so at the end of 1775, it came to an end. Mr. Rivington and his family boarded a ship to England, where they stayed for 2 years until the fall of 1777, and returned once the city was under British occupation, when Mr. Rivington then went on to print the Royal Gazette, or Rivington's Royal Gazette. After they broke into his print shop the first time, Mr. Rivington and his family did seek refuge on a ship in the harbor. Mr. Rivington then wrote a letter of apology to the people of New York in his newspaper, saying, "I'm sorry if I've offended people," and all of that, and then went back to work. Unfortunately, Mr. Rivington's fine newspaper is lost at the end of 1775, only to return in 1777 as a completely royalist newspaper, Mr. Rivington's Royal Gazette. Now, Mr. Holt continued publishing his newspaper throughout 1775. In 1776, he followed the massing of the army as it came to New York. He gave reports on the number of troops that were arriving, the number of ships that were arriving, who the commanders were, what was happening on Staten Island and all around the area. And then on July 5th, July 9th, let me count. Let's see. In Philadelphia, it was July 4th. They printed it on July 5th. And then it took a couple of days to get to New York. Got here on July 9th. And then Mr. Holt printed it. So around July 9th or July 10th, Mr. Holt printed the Declaration of Independence. Now, this was considered treason by the British, anyone who printed the Declaration, as well as the men, of course, who signed it and who authored it. But the printers were considered committing treason as well. So at the end of August, when it became clear that a British attack on the city was imminent, Mr. Holt printed the last issue of his paper. I think it was August 26th, 1776, where he printed the final count of troops and ships in New York and said goodbye, and closed down his printing press, and would not return to New York for 7 years. And he returned in early 1784 and printed his new newspaper for, I think, only a year before he himself died of natural causes. James Rivington, still in New York at the end of the American Revolution, but ultimately had to leave New York because he was so hated by the people here. Although in your time, you do have Rivington Street named after him on the Lower East Side, because years later, it was revealed that James Rivington helped send intelligence to General Washington during the British occupation of the war. So that was our story tonight about James Rivington's New York Gazetteer and John Holt's New York Journal or General Advertiser. And I hope you enjoyed it very much and it gave you some insight into the early newspaper rivalries here in America. Ms. Silver says, are there any copies that exist of Mr. Oh, there are many, many hundreds of copies. They're all available online on various services. The New York Public Library has quite a few. The National Archives has some. Library of Congress has some. And if you are near a research library, there is a subscription database called Newsbank that has a segment called America's Historical Newspapers that has every colonial newspaper fully searchable. That is what I use. I luckily have a researcher privileges at the New York Public Library, which I have to say I'm going to lose at the end of June because I no longer live in New York and can't pretend I'm there. So I'm hoping that one of my New York City friends is going to let me use her credentials to log in and continue to find these newspapers. But I do like to share them with you so that you can see them because they are very hard to find. And most of them that exist are either in museums or are in private collections. Now, this issue, incredibly, I got to see this issue in person at the New York Historical Society. They have a copy of this, and I happened to be in there doing a tour for some private clients one day, and they had it in a case on display, and it was quite a thing to see because this is such a famous or infamous issue of the New York Gazetteer. So it was really a thrill to get to see this an actual print of this in the New York Historical Society. So, when you go to these museums and exhibits, you really never know, what kind of great things you're going to find. And this was a great surprise. So does anybody else have any questions or comments or anything about newspapers and media? But, all of this really gets started with the Zenger trial and the idea that a printer cannot be sued for libel unless it can be proven that he or she, or if they're husband and wife team, they have printed a lie with malice. If they printed a lie and didn't know it was a lie, they're not liable. They're not liable for a charge of libel. Only if they purposely printed something that was a lie in order to cause harm. So you can see that it became virtually impossible to charge a printer with libel in New York. So instead, different factions tried to use coercive techniques to stop the printers from printing, like threatening them, as James Rivington suffered. Mr. White says, thank you for providing some of the unknown history of the time. It is my pleasure, sir. You know that that is what I do, and that is what my life is sharing the story of the founding of America. And it is my pleasure to be able to do this for all of you. And thank you so much for joining Mrs. Q Live. I will be back next week. Oh, we have my dog Rex, discriminated against because of citizenship, not domiciled in an approved something. I'm not sure what Rex, maybe Rex is having some problems with his paws on the keyboard. Approved location, discriminated against because of citizenship. I'm not sure what you mean, Rex. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what you mean. So again, thank you so much for joining me. And you can find me this Sunday at 9 p.m. on republicbroadcasting.org, where I will be talking about the upcoming battle at Lexington and Concord and what that was all about, as that is going to be April 19th. That's next Saturday that's occurring. If you don't already know, there is an effort the evening of Friday, April 18th. That's a week from tomorrow. So I'll be reminding you again next Thursday for people to hang 2 lanterns at their homes in honor of the 250th anniversary of the ride of Paul Revere. And Mr. Q and I will be hanging them here at our home. And we here in my county in Pennsylvania will be hanging them at the historic Dennison House in 44, Pennsylvania. And I hope that you'll be hanging them. I know that they'll be hanging them at the Old Dutch Church in Staten Island as well. My friends in the New York Sons of the American Revolution will be doing it there. So if you have a historical organization, please consider putting out 2 lanterns in the evening Friday, April 18th at dusk, and leaving them out all night to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the ride of Paul Revere. So thank you all for joining me. I'm just looking at some comments here. Rex says seems nothing changes. Actually, I'll get into this one night, but I think we have more freedom in my time, even though we're having problems with the crown, than you have in your time. And I'll tell you why one Thursday when we're together. So thank you very much. We're all finished tonight. I hope you have a safe journey home. And I'm going to go join Mr. Q for some evening conversation. Thank you again for joining me.